Wait,
Hey,
we're
wait.
not. Okay, I was going to count you down.
Seamless technology.
Right. There's always a delay in technology.
This is one job you won't be replaced.
All right, we are live.
Hi everyone, I'm Professor Margaret Martinosi from Computer Science, and I'm very happy to introduce my colleague Seth Goldstein from Carnegie Mellon. Seth and I have been working in similar architectural research areas, computer architecture research areas, for 25-ish years now. Way back to reconfigurable computing the first time it was a big deal in the 90s. And since then, he's worked on a range of projects that have to do with studying how ensembles of systems behave, whether it's ensembles of devices or, in this case, ensembles of people. And so he's going to talk about some of his new work, which is a little bit further from computer architecture than the stuff I'm familiar with. Oh, I should say a little more. He's from Carnegie Mellon. He got his PhD from Berkeley. He got his undergrad degree from Princeton. And can I say it?
Sure.
This is actually the first time that he has been back on campus since he got his degree. So be nice to him so that it's a good experience.
So, thank you for having me. It's lucky that I bumped into Margaret at Carnegie Mellon a while ago, and this is like a forcing function to get something out there. This is the first time I've talked about this off Carnegie Mellon's campus. So a while ago, I decided that as a computer architect, I was part of the problem, so to speak, and I wanted to be part of the solution. And I started thinking about the impact of technology on work, and my basic premise was, well, there won't be a lot of work left for human beings. And then I found out that a lot of economists did not agree with that, much to my surprise. So there's a ton of people on one side of this, particularly economists, that think that, well, the rate of GDP growth has been falling, and there's no real job loss, so this is sort of been there, done that. Then there are some other people who are really worried about it, very scary, we're not going to have any jobs, robots are going to take over, and the sky is falling. On the flip side of that, it could be a really great time. A lot of people talk about this in terms of robots taking over our jobs. That's like the killer app, robots, AI, and I just really, it's a lot more complicated than that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the different ways in which technology can impact the labor market. So first of all, the thing that we're all most familiar about is robots replacing humans, automation, like driverless cars and taxi drivers. But also, technology can just eliminate jobs, not because it's automated, but because it doesn't exist. There weren't a lot of buggy whip manufacturers after the car was introduced, not because there were buggy whip making robots, just not needed. Blockbuster, I don't know how people are old enough to remember Blockbuster anymore, but it doesn't exist either. It can also be labor complementing. It can enhance workers, right? You can turn essentially a run-of-the-mill accountant into a super accountant that can predict, do pivots and try to predict things, and now they're earning that much more and they're that much more productive. And then finally, it can create new jobs out of whole cloth. I'm sort of looking forward to all of the art and entertainment that goes into creating Grand Theft Auto 25 when I'm in my driverless car and I'm actually playing the game as I'm going down the street, projected on the interior. Okay, so obviously how technology affects work in this area is the hardest to think about. And this is where the economists say, hey, we'll just create new jobs, there's no problem. So there's some questions that this brings up, right? So is this time different? Okay, certainly in the first and second industrial revolutions, it was pretty dystopic to live through them. But afterwards, boy, it was great for everybody. And so are we in a different time? And if it's different, will there be significant job loss? And why, if we all believe, well, I don't know, maybe not we all, so I certainly believe technology's had a very significant impact on all of our lives, and yet the rate of GDP growth is decreasing. You'd expect, at least the way economists measure productivity, that the rate of GDP growth would be increasing as all this technology is having a huge impact. So what's the net effect of all this automation and general technology? And if there is an effect, when will it happen? So let's think about what a job is. In general, economists tend to segregate labor into high skill, medium skill, low skill, or it's the same. So I want to consider a job to be a set of tasks. Okay? And they're separable. So for instance, the UPS driver has a series of tasks like loading the truck, driving the truck, ringing a doorbell, getting someone to sign a package. I mean, all these things are sort of required to do the job. And if we think about sort of a job, and this is sort of one job here, and then there's all these different tasks, some take up more time than others, we can think about putting them on some kind of axis where the sort of skill and training, or the value of that to the human being, is running along the x-axis, and then the technical complexity to do that job is running along the y-axis. And the tasks will fit in different places. Okay. And the fact that this is sort of a U-shaped curve is no accident. In general, we've seen over the last 30, 40 years what people call the hollowing out of the middle, where sort of the routine middle skill jobs have been lost. Bookkeepers, secretaries, things where it's easy to define what the job is, whereas the low skill and high skill jobs haven't. So I'm sort of basically assuming that the cost of the job is related to its skill, and these low skill tasks and these high skill tasks are both more technically challenging than the medium skill tasks.
And by technically challenging, you mean challenging to get a machine to do them?
To get a machine to do them, or to get a machine to do something that makes them not necessary, one or the other. So, as machines do some of these, yes?
A couple questions on both
Yeah.
sides. Easier one first. So, what are the low-skill, high-technical complexity jobs?
Think about mopping the floor, or picking up the trash around, in the building. That is a fairly low-skill job. Most people in this room could probably do without much training. On the other hand, really hard to do technically.
Aren't there things on the far end of this curve that, on the other side, that are hard to replace, not because they're technically complex, but because there's some human element to them? When you think about radiology, for example, that's technically complex computer to do it, but the parts that are hard to replace are not.
So the sort of the radiological task,
Yeah.
I'd say that required a lot of training. I don't know what human component you're talking about, but in general, I'd say the sort of human components, by definition, because they're human components, don't require a lot of training. We're born to be humans. But I'm going to get to this sort of what's left for us in a minute. Well, not in a minute, in a few minutes. So imagine that technology has eliminated, for some reason, some of these tasks. Well, we've got, the job is still, the person's still working at the job. We didn't eliminate the complete job. And now the average cost of these tasks in terms of these remaining pieces taking up a little bit more time means that we're paying the person more money. Okay. We might be paying fewer people more money, but that person had their salary go up. Okay. On the other hand, if we manage to automate or eliminate some of these high-value components, then the salary is going to go down. If we eliminate the middle ones, this is the hollowing out of the middle, and I'd say this is what's been happening over the last 30, 40 years. One thing about this is that, in general, you would say, well, if there's a task that went away, then the way the salary changes, the way this has affected the sort of supply and demand of that particular job, would be there'd be a marginal decrease or increase in the salary. Okay? On the other hand, if we get rid of all this stuff in the middle, we no longer have a continuous line that we're moving, and we've got this huge chasm, Okay, and so when some skills are eliminated, trying to find another job maybe because you were let go because everything became more productive, now requires either a tremendous amount of training to move up the income ladder or very easy to move down the income ladder. So to put this in a historical context, I would suggest that the first two technology revolutions, and I'd rather call them technology revolutions than industrial revolutions because they have a lot more to do than just industry, but replace sort of lower skill tasks. Obviously, technology, compared to what we're doing today, was low, and so what that meant is that on average, sort of per capita wages increased for everybody. So that was great. A little bit of disruption. It was great overall. And what was happening in the late 20th century? This is the hollowing out of the middle. We're replacing these sort of middle value tasks that are also fairly low on the technology complexity. And what's happening today and making people afraid is, well, robotics is advancing in that sort of mop the floor kind of task, and machine learning and other advanced statistical methods are advancing in the sort of high cognitive, high skill tasks. Okay, so what's left? Okay. I want to keep pushing on this model of decomposing jobs. Okay, because jobs aren't just a bunch of separable tasks, but each task requires a set of components in order to do it. And if any one of those components is left in the hands of the human has to do the whole thing in some sense. So for instance, we could say that the task of actually unloading the package and getting the signature, okay, those are two different things, but requires some reading components. You have to be able to read the label, you have to be able to read an address, some manual dexterity, you've got to grasp the package and bring it up to the door. You have to do some object identification, like, that's a doorbell and that's a dog, I don't like dogs, whatever. And some oral comprehension, because you've got to listen to the person telling you what's going on. They want the package, they don't want the package. Any one of those components, if it's eliminated, either through automation or it's not necessary anymore, does not change the fact that we still need the human to do the whole task. Okay. This is where we're diverging from the traditional view of what a job looks like. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, it means that I've got a particular task here. This is 100% of the task, and in human hands. And slowly but surely, technology is picking away at individual components, and the human is still doing the task. They might be a little bit more productive, but the human is still required to be there. And slowly but surely, we add more technology, and we've taken over more and more of these components. At some point, it becomes economically beneficial to replace the human with technology. Okay. But not until that point. And so you almost cannot see the effect of technological progress until that last component has eliminated the job. So imagine we have, my first actual paid job was as a cash register person at a supermarket, checkout person at a supermarket. And there's a lot of stuff involved in that. You had to remember the prices of the apples, you had to weigh them, multiply the number of pounds times the price, you had to make change, add, multiply, subtract, interact, a bunch of things. And so we have modern cash registers, and it's eliminated a whole bunch of these things. We still had to have I know we don't have humans doing this anymore, but there's still a human required to do most of this. Human was doing it. What it did was, though, the effect is complicated. Because what it did is increase the supply of people that could do the job. You could get people that did not need to remember things. You could get people that did not know how to add and subtract. Okay? So that makes the cashiers more productive, or at least it increases the number of people that could do the job. Okay? But it doesn't actually eliminate the cashiers until we eventually come into a situation where we have, the self-checkout thing. Okay? So lots of complicated interactions here. Questions at this point? Yes?
Well, it's not really a question. I'm just going to argue that you haven't so people wanted to. Definitely they wanted to totally eliminate humans at the checkout point or also at the ticket office and whatever. And it's turned out that there are 2 or 3 people that you want still around to handle problems for the customers or whatever. And so this hasn't been a job eliminator, it's been another example of increasing the efficacy of a smaller number of people, but that allows you to have more branches of stores. And
It's true. That is absolutely true. There are more bank tellers today than ever before. Right? Because it's so cheap to have a bank teller. Anybody can do it. You might as well put them on every store corner, every corner.
Well, it's not just that you can have anybody do it, it's that for each teller or each branch you can get an awful lot of work done because the machines are doing these routine tasks. So
like I said, it's complicated. I'm agreeing with you completely. Okay? As long as there's some components left, you have to have a human in the job.
Well, but what I'm disagreeing with is that there may be, and maybe we should wait till the end for this, but there's always one component, there's always those few components left, because work is about humans, and so there's always a little bit.
So we can argue about that.
So I was pulling up the thing to say that we have not eliminated all the colors. There's still a couple people there.
True. And people in different, DBAs. There was no DBA in the supermarket that I worked in.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So in order to think about this model, we wanted to see whether it had any legs to stand on it, the idea of components and tasks, to sort of decompose the jobs and understand whether that was reasonable. So ONET is this online database that I think the Bureau of Labor Statistics maintains, which basically has a whole slew of jobs and then a bunch of components that are needed to do that job. Okay? So this is my job. Most of the people in this room job. So we need to prepare and deliver lectures. Those are part of the tasks. We need some. Let's see. Whoops. Sorry. We need to know how to instruct and speak and read and write and critical thinking settings. So this is it's a huge slew of data that a lot of people have accused of being just noise. Okay. With every one of these components, there are two numbers. One is the importance of that component to the job. Okay, so I don't know what exactly it means to say that active listening gets a 66 while reading comprehension gets a 75. It's just that maybe reading comprehension is more important than active listening. Okay. So this is the importance. In addition, there is something called level, which is, think of it, how sophisticated you have to be at this task. So here's a particular component, administration and management. It's a knowledge component. They have these components broken up into things like knowledge, skills, tasks, work activities, a bunch of different things. And we see that they have different levels here. Well, let's look at complex problem solving. And they have exemplars, because the labels for these, if you actually start to dig into the ONET data, are essentially meaningless. Okay, they say one thing and they mean something else. Complex problem solving is probably closest to one that makes intuitive sense, but they're saying at level 2, that means to lay out the tools to complete a job. At level 4, it's redesign the floor layout of a manufacturing facility to take advantage of new technology. We can see that's a little more than twice as hard. Okay? And then at level 6 would be to develop and implement a plan for emergency relief for an entire metropolitan area. Again, probably not just a factor of 3 harder than the original. So we've got these levels. They range from 0 to 7, but for any one component, they might have a much smaller range in the entire database. So for instance, administration and management goes from essentially 0 to essentially 6.
So is this basically the x-axis of your previous graph, or is this some combination of the x and the y-axis? What is it?
So it's not related to the y-axis at all. This is just about the human complexity. And so we're going to be able to combine importance and level and come up with some metric. Okay. So importance ranges from 1 to 5, so we rescale it to 0 to 1, and then we normalize it so that the sum of the importances for all the components of a job sum to 1. So we're basically treating this importance as sort of an indicator of how much of your job is required, and you add up all the components, it should add up to 1. Okay, and level is a range from 0 to 7, and we rescale it to 0 to 1, and then because we've got this weird, it's not linear, we treat it as an exponent, right? So here's administration and management. Level 2 is sign a pay voucher. Level 6 is manage a $10 million company. Okay, it's the same component, but at very different levels of sophistication. So then we say a job, very simple model, is just the sum of all the components involved in this job where we sum up the importance times e to the level. Okay. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to see, can we use this metric for these components to predict the value of a salary, in which would allow us to essentially say how valuable that component is. And we're going to use that as a stand-in for the human complexity of that component. Okay. So our model essentially gives each one of these components two things, an intercept and a slope, and we're going to sum these up. So it's just a very simple additive model. Okay. We start off with 1,000 occupations that don't all make sense because the salary information is different than the ONET information, and 161 components. We combine those operations. We've got to, because we don't want to do overfitting, we've got to eliminate a bunch of these components. So we essentially split the data in two. The training set then we run lasso on to essentially select the components that are important. And we end up with half of the data and just 12 components. So lasso picks out 12 components. And then we just do OLS and we see what the value is. So here's the unbelievable thing. We can explain 80% of the variation with this very, very simple model in salaries. Okay. And here are the components sorted by whatever the slope and intercept. Okay, the ones in bold are actually have some significance. Okay, so this isn't the right way to think about this because this slope is related to an exponent. And we probably overcomplicated our model by having both an intercept and a slope, and we could have gotten away with just slope. But this is what the data is we have now. Okay, so now here I have the same components sorted by how much they're worth at the median in the database for all jobs. Okay. So we say at level 0, time management is worth 25,000. If your job was 100% time management. Okay.
So you're predicting salaries based on
the components,
skill levels.
right? Skill levels and importance in that job. Okay. So first thing to notice is that at level 0, basically these are all worth the same. And that sort of makes sense because level 0 is like sign a pay voucher. For medicine and dentistry, it's put on a Band-Aid. I mean, basically, if you're a human being, you can probably do level 0 for all of these things. And so they're worth the same amount. That seems completely reasonable. Okay. Let me now, instead of looking at all these different things with all those different numbers, just take the top 12 values related to the component and the level. And so medicine and dentistry at level 6 is worth $686,000. Okay. So first we see medicine and dentistry shows up a lot. This probably is the AMA effect. They're a very good union and they've made things very expensive in the United States. If we think about what these skills are. So remember, this is a knowledge component. If you want to do open heart surgery, there's a lot of other things you need. You need hand-eye coordination, and vision acuity, and tons and tons of things. But one of the things you need is the knowledge of how to do open heart surgery. Okay, and then level 5 is fill a tooth, and level 4 is like suture a wound. So you can see that as you go down in these levels, because it's an exponent, we really go down in sophistication and also in amounts, 686 to 112. So now let's look at the rest of these. They're all related to each other. And one thing to note, given that we're all educators, is there's no STEM qua STEM. Okay, that's sort of surprising. Since Sputnik, we've been pushing on STEM, 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 STEM. Okay. Not clear that that is where we should be pushing. Yes?
So STEM was included as one of the components?
Yeah, so out of these 161 components, there's probably about 15 that we'd say are STEM qua STEM, like mathematical reasoning and chemistry and biology, and there's a whole bunch of them. Science. Now, part of the issue is that when we do lasso and pick these things out, obviously each of these components is sort of a proxy for a whole bunch of other stuff. And is complex problem solving at level 5 require a lot of STEM? I don't know. I mean, I think you could probably learn complex problem solving in your history class just as well as you can learn it in your DiffyQ class.
Just, you know, go to the term about the problem, but they're gonna tag all kinds of different jobs with complex problem solving. And
Is complex problem solving your term for
No, this is their
the
term.
lasso component?
It's their term, and what this means is the example they give is to develop and implement and provide emergency relief for a major metropolitan area.
Which is clearly social science.
I mean, I would say you have to do a lot of stuff. You've got to know about, like, you know, frequency domains and spectrum analysis to get sure that everyone can talk to each other. And, I mean, there's a lot of STEM in that, but the complex problem part is the part that is predictive of the salary. The model was not forced to pick STEM or not STEM. I'm just saying, these are proxies. There's no question about it. So, making decisions and solving problems, manage a $10 million company. The ability to apply general rules to specific problems, that's deductive reasoning at level 5. I mean, we've got these are the exemplars I'm pulling out of their database. These are not from me, this is from ONET. This is the kind of information they're giving to the interviewers who are going out and talking to lots of people and trying to decide on what the importance and level of each of these components are. I understand it sounds like this should produce noise. But on the other hand, the adjusted R squared for this analysis is 0.8. So there's got to be something going on. Okay.
now I'll ask a question I was going to ask before. So there's significant salary differences based on different demographics for certain occupations,
Yes.
right?
So we didn't.
Female-dominated fields tend to get paid lower than male. So how does that? Which model?
This is lumping everybody together.
What's your model predictive of?
This is lumping everybody together from sort of the census database. We're not doing any kind of regional analysis, gender analysis, age analysis, experience analysis. The only thing I can say is that the salary number we use is the median salary in the job. And I will say this. If we use the 10th percentile salary, some STEM shows up. Now, I don't know whether that's just luck or the model has some randomness in there, but it pulls it out. And so one thing you might say is a little bit of STEM is needed to get in the door, but if you really want to move up the income ladder, these soft arts are probably more important. Yes?
The other thing about salaries is it's also correlated with the amount of risk you take in the job. It's not necessarily just the complexity of the job, but the amount of risk that an individual takes with the job. So, like in medicine, if the higher risk jobs tend to be, you get compensated more. And there could be lower complexity jobs that have higher risk, and those have a higher salary too.
Okay, so there's obviously a lot of factors we have not considered. I don't claim that we can model everything, but I'm going to again say 0.8. Okay, so something, it's speaking for something here. Yes?
Question about the input data. I mean, when you showed the professor input data before, like science was at the bottom of the slide you showed, like 30 out of 100. I mean,
so remember, this isn't a particular kind of professor. This is a professor. So
computer science.
Oh, did it say computer science?
Computer science. Yeah.
So,
we'd have to look at the database. We'd have to look at the database and see where's science.
it's like at the very bottom of the screen. I mean,
yeah. So first of all, we don't know what the level is of this, and
Well,
second of all, it's science using scientific
just
rules and
reading the
methods to
definition
solve
there.
problems. I don't know. There's
you
complex
can't do
problem
this job
solving.
without that one sentence description. So I don't know. I mean, is there an issue with the input data here?
Maybe, but I don't know how you explain its predictive power. I
Well, I
don't.
think they've constructed a model that they like, right? I mean, so part of it is who's.
Well, these
valuing
interviewers,
these
they do this every year. So the data goes back to 2003, I think. This is for 2015, I should say. Yes.
I just wonder to what extent, the people might be coding things based on salary. I don't know
that's
if
true.
that's possible.
It is possible. There's no
Yeah.
question.
So that's always just a concern.
Yep. Okay. So, I don't think the ONET data is noise, though. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten the result that we got. It seems like the component model is reasonable. We could talk about this STEM cross-STEM business out the wazoo. I I think we should be re-examining our educational goals, not just given this data, but generally where the world is headed, and I'll get to that in a little bit. I have until when, by the way? 1:30? Okay. Keep asking questions as I go, because I'll just use up all the time. Okay. So this is the only multivariate analysis of the ONET data that we know of. But if everyone else does basically a univariate analysis, everybody has a different way of trying to piece together the importance and level information. And so if we look at different ways that people have pieced this together using our method, these are the different adjusted R-squareds we get. So I think the key insight I think that we had into the data is just this exponential business. Okay? But it's a very simple model. And I want to use the model for something. Okay? So now I'm going to start using this model for something. So let's say if we believe the component model, and you've got to eliminate sort of all the components to a task, because just because you can have a computer that can do oral comprehension doesn't mean it can do any of the jobs or tasks that require oral comprehension. Most jobs require other things too. So imagine each one of these squares is a job. It's got a bunch of components in it, and slowly but surely technology is replacing the components. Okay. So over time, so one thing is that salaries will shift, of course, because as you replace higher level components, the salary will go down, and as you replace lower level components, the salary will go up. And as we get more technology, we'll also get new kinds of jobs completely created out of whole cloth. Search engine optimizer just didn't exist 20 years ago. Okay? You'll notice I made these rectangles a little bit smaller because those jobs start off with a bunch of components already optimized. There aren't a whole lot of search engine optimizers in the world because they haven't really, really good tools. And that makes them very, very productive. Okay, but meanwhile, we keep adding components, and sometimes a whole job gets eliminated. Like, you know, there's not too many video rental clerks left in the world. Okay? But all the rest of these jobs, they sit there, okay? Okay? We get more jobs, some disappear, and then we get to this point where we get a phase shift, and enough components have been automated or done by technology that that next component covers a bunch of different jobs. Okay? And so that's the last component to be automated. All of a sudden, it is now economically a good idea to replace the human being with technology, invest in the capital, and we get a whole bunch of jobs that disappear once. Okay, so this is essentially our model. So taking this data, running it through a model that tries to figure this out, we can say if we think about the monolithic job model, where jobs are either there or they're not, then if we believe that technology is improving over time, then we can say slowly but surely jobs are eliminated. Okay, that's basically what people expect. Yes?
Are you shooting for 5 years in the future or 10 years in the future? Because it occurs to me that one thing not accounted for in your model is the possibility that humans will themselves merge with AI along the lines of something like what Elon Musk is saying. And, you know, it seems implausible 5 years from now, but 10 years from now it could become an expectation to have a certain position that one uses AI components themselves. And so that could really change.
We all use AI components all the time.
Yeah, I mean direct.
Okay, DBI, I believe in it, and I'm sure that I will have one. So I'd like to keep the time component off the table. You can talk to Ed about that later. I have no idea when this is happening. I should tell you my bias is that my kids, one of whom just graduated and the other one that's in college, is going to be impacted by this seriously. So the next 25 years.
But you're assuming unenhanced humans in your model.
No, to me, that's a direct brain interface is just another technology. Yes?
Okay, I want to push back the other direction in time. So I remember when I was in school in the 70s, and kids were dropping out to go automate bookkeeping. Mm-hmm. And then they all lost their jobs because of Lotus 1, 2, 3. Mm-hmm. And then they went back to school, right? And there are still people that bookkeep by books, even though we've had this technology for decades. So I don't see that, maybe I should rephrase this. Do you believe, I can't question, yes. Do you really believe that that this is something that's totally changed? And if not, why can't we see evidence of it in the past besides the elevator operators, the only ones who've lost their jobs, right? I mean, totally lost their jobs. I mean, there's fewer secretaries per company, but there's not, you know, the PC revolution reduced the number of secretaries per company, but it didn't eliminate secretaries, right?
In fact, what it did is it made them more valuable, right?
Yeah.
And so you went from secretary to super secretary, legal secretaries, medical secretaries, administrative assistants. Eventually, those people just go away.
And
There aren't a lot of secretaries left that don't just do calendaring, not many of those left, at law firms, for instance.
Well, and I'm sure paralegals are going to disappear. But I still don't think that we'll still have lawyers, we'll still have pathways
Okay,
to get to law.
so you believe by this, that technology improves slowly but surely, some jobs will be eliminated, and we should see evidence of that over time.
Right, I'm saying I would expect it to be able to see it for the last 200 years. We should see this.
So I don't think that that's true. I think this is what you see if you buy into my model.
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't.
That's okay. You're replacing all those components. Nothing is really happening in terms of unemployment or labor participation.
No, but what's happening is that the jobs are changing, and so new components are needed.
That's
That's
right.
why it's an ongoing continuous process.
I
and it's
agree
not
that new
some
components are
singularity.
added, but those new components also get automated.
Well, yeah,
So
and
here's
then
a really
that
good
time,
example.
more innovation
CGI, computer graphics, really hot in whenever Star Wars came out, right? Hundreds and thousands of programmers employed in that. Okay, now we're up to a couple handful, because the software has gotten so good that one person can do so much.
I know more than a couple handful of those guys. There's that many more movies and games being produced. That's what I'm saying. The economy keeps shifting to this. Like
Okay, I'm going to get to a shifting economy in a minute. I would suggest that this can explain, maybe it doesn't, but it can explain why there's no significant job loss. And also why the rate of growth of GDP is actually going down. Because when you get a cashier paid $15 an hour and then everyone starts getting paid $12.50 an hour, well, the GDP just went down. Okay. So let me think about the shifting jobs. I think we need a little historical context for that. So we've got Industrial Revolution 1, or Technology Revolution 1. It's, by the way, mostly about energy use and less about anything else. So that was coal-powered steam engines. Technology Revolution 2, it's about electricity and internal combustion engines, I would argue, mostly. We can talk about the solar residual or whatever, and how economists for years and years and years just said, I can't explain 60% of it, but well, that's okay. But if you look at energy usage, you can explain a lot more of what's going on. So here's where we are now. Starting in 1965, Margaret can tell you why. So we have renewables, manufacturing without assembly. This would be like photolithography and 3D printing and stuff, and computation. Okay. So I would like to suggest that...
So you used 1965 because of Moore's Law,
Yeah.
I assume, right?
Yeah.
So Moore's Law has been likened to Gutenberg. So where's information flow in all this?
Well, the steam-powered printing press changed the whole way people got their information flow.
Organized it. You talked a lot about energy. You didn't talk about information.
Yeah, I think energy is really the dominant thing. I don't think AI and robots is really what is changing everything around us, or it won't change it. If that was all it was, I wouldn't be worried. But when we get to $0 per watt, obviously that's not going to happen, but when we get really close, everything is energy. Right? Food is energy, heat is energy, computation is energy. So I think that's actually the bigger deal. But that's as a sort of a side distraction. Okay, so it's going to improve productivity. It's going to increase wealth on average, but it's going to cause massive disruption. Fine. Okay, but TR3 is different, qualitatively different and quantitatively different. Okay. So first of all, TR1 and TR2, you got electricity or you didn't have electricity. It didn't get a lot better over time. Okay. You either had it or you didn't. Whereas almost all the technologies we're talking about today are experiencing exponential growth throughout.
So you mean exponential and fast, right? Because everything grows exponentially.
The ability to have electricity or indoor plumbing did not grow exponentially. You either got it or you didn't.
But the capability of the technology, right?
What?
What you could do in
well,
terms
that's the next step.
I mean,
Sure.
but A couple of things. I mean, the penetration grew exponentially. There were 8,000 cars in the U.S. in 1900, and by 1920 something or another, there were about 20 million cars. And I'm sorry, this is more just a comment to somebody's question before about why we may be seeing low productivity, even though low productivity growth, while technology is coming in. What people don't often think about is there's an implementation cost. There was an article in American Economic Review a couple of years ago about, it was more a historical article, but when electric engines came in for manufacturing, it actually took a while to get it implemented, and you had people who had to redesign everything. You know, it's not like you have a steam-powered plant, you drop in the electric engine, you actually end up, you know, running two plants for a while. And this is more an anecdotal personal experience. I was meeting with the head of one of the biggest retailing companies in the U.S., and it's an old line brick and mortar retailer. And he was actually explaining that for the next few years he's running two companies. There's his online company as it ramps up and he's hiring people, and the physical one.
This points
so
to the
productivity
fact that,
went down.
The technology might exist, but it's not economically profitable to do it. That's all.
Or you're running a legacy technology while you're also having to bring up this new technology.
So, I'm the exponential thing. I'm going to just say it. It's there. One thing I think is, you know, people say, "Oh, Moore's law is that," and Moore's law is not really about computation. It's about manufacturing. Okay, it's assembly-free manufacturing, and that's what allows it to grow exponentially. Okay, so another difference is uniquely cognitive tasks are being attacked by TR3 as opposed to the previous technology revolutions. But here's the big one: that the labor component of the marginal cost of production is approaching zero. So yes, to write that ebook, you've got to get a human being in the loop. It takes time. There's an editor back and forth. But to sell the next ebook, not so expensive. There's no humans in that loop. Okay. So what happened in the first and second industrial revolution is, yes, it's super productive, and the price of shirts fell like by a factor of an order, 3 orders of magnitude, and put a lot of people out of work. But all of a sudden, everyone could buy a shirt. But those new shirts that had to be made required human beings. Even if it was less human beings, so many more shirts were needed, everybody got a new job. That's not true what's happening now. Yes?
Just wanted to make sure I understand. So when you say the labor component of production is decreasing, is that mainly because things are digital, or is it some other component about this technology revolution?
Delivering the next Amazon package requires less and less human labor. I would say all of these technologies are requiring less and less human labor per unit, the marginal cost. Yes?
But isn't that just a feature of all kind of improvements in technology, where the marginal costs of distribution and production, I mean, like Gutenberg, for example, and, you know, so what I'm wondering is, what is particularly special about this technology?
When you get down to epsilon, like an ebook, the increase in demand for the decrease in price doesn't employ any more human beings. If you wanted to print more copies of the Bible, you needed to have more printers. Not as many as you had when you had scribes, but you still needed more people. Okay. So my own personal feeling, even though we can't see it, massive technological unemployment is around the corner. That means less than 50 years. We should worry about it now. We're not particularly special, and I'm not the person with the insight here. An economist, as Leontief basically said in the 1980s, you know, the horse stopped being a factor of production. Okay? What you have now is race horses and show horses, but we don't have horses pulling plows. And that distinction between what we needed to get done and what we want to do is important. Okay? So with respect to human labor, my own personal feeling is that yes, TR3 might be the last technology revolution. Okay? But there are plenty of resources available. Not just the marginal labor cost of production, but the marginal cost of production is also going down. We should have abundant resources. They're just not distributed very well. So the question is, what are people doing? Are they doing sort of these really crappy, low-pay jobs, sort of servants to the rich? I hope not. That would be sort of very dismal, in my opinion. And in fact, there's a recent article in Wired, I forget who wrote it, saying we should train everybody to be a caregiver. And I just don't buy it. Okay. I don't think it's very satisfying, and I also think it's wrong-headed. And I'll get to that in a minute. So what does this all mean?
Well,
I don't think it's a yawn.
A lot of the computer science professor's skills aren't.
I think there are going to be a lot fewer computer science professors. Look, I'm a reasonably good teacher, but I'm not the best. I don't think anyone's going to want me to deliver them lectures in 20 years. The one or two great lecturers will have all of their material distributed to everybody. I don't think this is just a yawn. It could be scary, it could be happy. I'm all for happy. Okay, so I'd like to engineer a world in which it's happy. But I think TR3 poses two existential threats to most of humanity. There's no way I'm getting to the end of this talk. Okay, well anyway, how do you get the resources you need to live if you don't have a job, for instance? And how do you find meaning and dignity? I think that's more important. Okay. So I think we need a change in perspective here. Okay, there's plenty of resources, but most people are not employable the way we think about employment today at vocations. So what does everybody do? Well, I think they pursue their avocations. This would be the changing nature of jobs, but it's going to be a radical change. Okay. So Benny, who happens to be the best pumpkin grower in the world, likes to spend his time growing pumpkins. Some people will play bridge. Other people will make sculpture with pop tabs from their soda cans, whatever. This is what I think is going to happen. And you know, some people will spend their time, answering Stack Overflow questions. Yeah.
I'll put it to you that this is already describing quite a lot of the economy. So there's not...
Yes.
And again, we still think of it as jobs. So the difference between humans and horses is that humans are what is the core of our own society. And so when we find out how to make statues out of pop tabs, then we go somewhere and we start selling them to people. So I know that you're trying to get through your talk. But I just want to tell you that this is exactly the point.
I think this is a radical shift, certainly the way it is perceived by policymakers today. The NEA doesn't have a whole lot of money.
Let me go back to a different.
Let me keep going, and we can talk offline. Okay.
We are.
So what are we going to do? I think what we're going to do is jobs that require super creativity. So this is completely new fields. Not compose music that's pop music, because that a computer will be able to do, but come up with a new genre. But I think also what we're going to do is we're going to do jobs where the empathy is required on the part of the consumer for the service or good. So this is generally flipped from the way people tend to think about it. It will definitely require a human being to do the job if part of the job description is that the consumer has to have empathy for the producer. There's just no way that a machine can do that. So that hand-built table that's not as good as the 3D printed table, it's built by a human and you appreciate that, you are going to get that. Okay? Football might be better done by robots, but it's the fact that the human being is doing that engages the consumer. And we'll play a lot, I think. So how will we do it? So there is no way I'm going to present this in 1 minute. Yeah, I want to invent money. Not in 1 minute, though. Okay, you guys will just have to invite me back. I don't want to just rush through it because it's hopeless if I just rush through it. Oops. Let's come up. Where am I here? Okay. So I'm gonna summarize here. I'm not going to talk about the money. So first of all, we have this new model, component model of jobs. If someone's interested in reading a draft on the paper and giving us some comments and telling us where we should publish it, I'd love that because I'm not an economist. I think we can accurately describe jobs by a set of components. The ONET data is coherent. We can predict salary. And I think it explains why we had technological progress without a lot of job loss or commensurate job loss. It's going to be a phase shift that happens. I think it also can explain the decrease in the rate of growth of GDP. The whole society is becoming more productive, but at a slower pace because people are moving from $15 an hour jobs or $35 an hour jobs to $10 an hour. And also the fact that there's salary stagnation in spite of low unemployment, because the supply of those jobs that people can get, that they move down the skill ladder, in some sense they fall through this chasm because all those middle level tasks and components have been already taken care of, leads to salary stagnation. So if we don't do it right, it's going to be bad. But I think if we do it right, it's going to be amazing. We'll all be able to do what we want to do. Okay. And this is my new money system, so that's just a teaser. So anyway, so that's, I think, yes, jobs are going to change. I'm not sure that what they're going to change into is something that people will currently pay US dollars for, particularly if they don't have a job to get those US dollars. And so that we need to think about a new social technology that allow people to interact with each other the way money helps us interact with people, complete strangers, and get things done to help us get to that new future. So I'm done.
Do you have the salaries and components by year? And over how many years do you have them? Just out of curiosity.
So the really good quality data starts in 2003. Before that, there's this thing called the Dictionary of Occupation Titles that is really hard to deal with. So we have looked at sort of longitudinal change. That's not here. And you can see that there definitely the components required by jobs are changing, and some components become less valuable, some become more. And
yeah, that was going to be my second question. So what are the I'm just curious, what is a component that seems to be which one is increasing in terms of its ability to predict salary over time, and which is
its ability to predict or its value?
Well, its value. That's the coefficient estimate on the components, right?
Okay, it's a really good question. I should have that answer for you off the top of my head, but I don't.
Okay.
Send me some mail, and I'll be so happy to send you that data. Yes.
So I wanted to hear a little bit more about your positive solution, and also what you think about taxing the robots or universal basic income, these kinds of things.
So I think universal basic income would be an awesome thing to do, but I don't think we will do it. So I'm very pessimistic that the policymakers in today's environment, or even if things got really desperate, will do the right thing. And add it up. It's like trillions of dollars. Sure, the Republicans are willing to give up $1.5 trillion away. That's no, but 12 trillion? I don't think that's going to happen. So my basic idea is that what I want to do is monetize the IOU using the technology that we have for sort of understanding the networks that people are in and the risk of people taking your IOU. And so now essentially people can print their own money. You can imagine bootstrapping that system by having the US government not give people $30,000 a year, let's say, but rather guarantee $30,000 for every citizen that they print. So you could take Seth dollars and you could go to the Federal Reserve and you could get US dollars, just like you used to be able to take US dollars and get gold. Okay? So the question is will people do that? And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that people won't. So we could give people a universal basic income at a fraction of the cost. So that's basically what the solution is about. It's basically technology to make micro bearer bonds doable for 25 cents. Yes?
Do you see academics being replaced in the near future?
Define near for me and I'll tell you, I'll go on record.
10 years.
No.
20 years.
Maybe. I mean, we do a lot, there are lots of tasks to my job, right? And so some of it is going to go away, like teaching. For most people, there'll be some people who are really great, and the technology to deliver a lecture that's tracking your eye gaze and your heart rate and your pulse and what you're doing and your cell phone usage and everything, and immediately knows when you go off track and figures out that you need this little remedial thing here, is going to be so much better than anything that I could do. Advising students, I don't know. Doing research, I don't know. Yes.
Do the components change over the years?
Yes, they do.
And can you predict the components as well?
No. I'll admit it. Yes.
As we move forward, do you visualize preferences changing on behalf of consumers? So, for example,
really
it's not
question.
so much of wanting things or experiences, but rather, as the historian Yuval Harari's put it, we're searching for bliss, divinity, and immortality.
So the way I would put it is that society is moving up Maslow's hierarchy. Okay? So in other words, I know this sounds very namby-pamby, left-wing, liberal kind of thing, but the social net of the future, if we do things right, will be therapy. Right? Everyone will have all the food and shelter and security that they need, and they'll be like, I don't know how to self-actualize. Help me. And that'll be the social net of the future because we've taken care of the things at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. Yes, I agree with that completely. Yes.
Going out there in the future, big ideas, what about space exploration? It seems like space exploration is one technological revolution that will require a huge investment, a huge direction, and it seems like if everybody's time is freed up, people could be working on that.
I hope to, I have a deal with my wife. We got married. I said, 2050 we're going to Mars no matter what. So I'm going to Mars in 2050, so I hope that happens. You don't need a lot of humans for that. In fact, almost every plan that people have put for colonizing Mars starts with lots of robots. I'm not sure there's humans involved. Yes?
I want to go to this thing I most agree with, which is that technology is making people more exchangeable, and that has an effect on wages. Now, when I agree with that, and when I do these talks, a bunch of people stand up and say, you don't understand the digital divide, and actually there is this big difference being created between who is good with technology, and they wind up going to work for Google, and then a lot of everybody else is on this tail.
Yes.
But I would more broadly argue that we're in a serious problem with the high inequality, high Gini coefficient, which I think is largely but not entirely exogenous to AI. And you were saying about energy, I think it's actually cost of transport is a big part of the issue too. So
I think the fundamental problem that we could focus on today, as opposed to worrying about whether we're having jobs tomorrow, is the fact that the #1 predictor of what income percentile you die in is what you were born into, and it is pathetic and horrible that as a society, that is what we do. I think that my currency solution would actually affect that too. There's no reason for this digital divide, but I think what's happening is it's being exacerbated by the fact that you can't go from being a secretary to being a CEO anymore. There's just too many things in the between that you can't do. You've got to make this huge skill leap from the below, the bottom level components to these top level components.
But couldn't AI help with that? Let me finish the statement I was going to say in the first place, which is, yes, the social mobility issue. I think there's a confound between some of the stuff you're looking at with the GDP and things and the rising inequality, which is sort of exogenous, and the stuff that you're actually trying to address, and that might also change the way that you're looking at some of the numbers you're looking at.
I think another part of the thing is that there are a lot of gatekeepers and technology is disrupting. So like
I think that's what we're talking about. I don't disagree.
To go with the example of your ebook, it used to be that when somebody wanted to publish a book, they had to go through a lot of rejection before they got it published. So there were a lot of people that say this is good literature, this is bad literature. It seems now that anybody can just put their ebook online because there's no cost of production, and that means that in some ways it's a lot easier to become an author than it was 50 years back.
Except that there's so many of those ebooks out there, and most of them are so crappy that you have no idea where to go to. And I'd say a couple of extra gatekeepers on my information flow I would love.
Yeah. But that's not true. If you look at what has happened in the internet, it's that there are people who want to pay for those crappy ebooks, and the problem before the internet is that you couldn't find those people. You produced a crappy book, then matching it to the people that will make it a living was hard. Now you have Facebook, and you can target people who like my crappy book. So
no, I agree with you, and I think that technology can be great. It can also be horrible, as we've seen over the last year. But it's sort of orthogonal to what I'm discussing.
What I'm saying is that the career path that typically elevates people, we think of companies as things that you go in working as the mail room clerk, and you go to become the CEO. That doesn't happen, but the same. It seems like people are taking a loophole, which is these self-anointed positions. Social entrepreneur, books, and all these sort of things.
I think that is true. I think that is going to help us in the long run. I definitely agree with that. Okay, thank you very much.